Well, it is absolutely a treat to have you, Tyler, with us today. And you are in the middle of doing something really big. So I appreciate you squeezing us in. Um, yeah, tell everyone what you're up to. You're, you're right in the thick of it, too. It's like deadlines are coming up for you.
Yeah, hosting the Ennea Summit on this time on the 27 subtypes. And thank you guys for joining me on the summit to learn about hunters, farmers, and teamers. I've read your book from, front to back and really gleaned a lot from your content and just really love how you've contributed to the Enneagram community. And so I've been reading your book and then also getting ready for this summit with 20 plus speakers, and we have 48 panelists on 9 different subtype panels, and you guys have been leading the way in all of your panels. And so you guys have really been doing just giving out so much great content for people. And so I've just been really blessed by what you guys have done. So thank you for kind of leading the way. And I hope that, that people can learn a lot from this summit coming up here on June 3rd through the 6th.
Give us a little background on like what led you to do these summits, because from what I see, you're gathering together the Enneagram community leaders, speakers, coaches, thinkers in a way that I haven't seen anything else before done like this. And so you're doing something I think that's really important in this world. So give us a little of the backstory, like how did that start? 'Cause the journey is never like just what we see, right? So there's always like that personal side of the journey. Give us a little backstory of that.
Yeah, well, this will come up later, but I spent the last 2 decades in like full-time Christian pastoral ministry. You guys have a little bit of the same story as me. And I'm type 3, who's a workaholic, and gave myself to the church and would work really, really hard. But it was really hard on my family. I was doing what unhealthy threes do and just kind of sacrificing your family on the altar to achieve more. And I read Donald Miller's book, Hero on a Mission.
Oh, okay.
And I was sitting in a coffee shop and I'd been reading that book and I was just about ready to turn 40. And he's asking you to reverse engineer your life. Like to say, okay, the average life expectancy is 72. This goes in with our wisdom conversation. To count your days. So if the average life expectancy is 72, then okay, count how many years you have left. What are you going to do with those years? And I thought, man, my family has had such a hard decade that I can't put them through that again. And so I need to make a decision to walk away and to leave my full-time pastor job and dedicate more of that to my family in this next decade. And just to give some more context, we have 2 adopted boys, 11 and 14. Both are biracial. One's on the spectrum. One's a counterphobic 6. One's an 8. So there's a lot there. Yeah, and they're living right next to each other. Their bedrooms are right next to each other. So I'm like, we need to upgrade our house. We need to create some more space. Our family needs a lot. And so I made that big move to transition out of the church ministry to do Enneagram stuff full time. And so I tried my summit, the very first summit a couple of years ago, and it just exceeded my expectations. People loved it. They loved coming and watching for free and getting all these diverse perspectives from Enneagram speakers from a variety of different schools. And so that really surprised me. And so I said, okay, I guess I'm in the summit business. There's a demand for this, and I'm going to just keep doing it until people stop showing up. And that's kind of what led me to doing this, Jim.
Yeah. You had I think in your email to us around the topic of what I'd like to explore with you is the theme of diversity as it relates to wisdom. That diversity helps lead us to wisdom. It isn't that diversity itself is wise, but it guides us towards that. And that seems to be part of your story. And so even with like the Ennea Summit that Jim said, you brought together a lot of different thoughts. So it's like, okay, instincts, right? You might have wanted to bring in the leading expert or the leading voice on the subject and leave it there.
Or at least everyone who agrees.
Everybody who
that
agrees.
Everything
Exactly.
ever uses the same language and means the same things or talking about it in the same way. Right. And you didn't.
Yeah. So I'm curious about that as something that seems to be important to you, because very act of bringing together different voices. And why is that important to you?
Yeah. Eventually working my way on that line towards the healthy 9 space of all perspectives are needed here. Everyone needs a seat at the table. There's everyone has something that we can learn from. And I love that you guys are using hunters to describe sexually dominant people. After a summit talking about subtypes and instincts, I'm so tired of saying sexual over and over again. I'm like, okay, hunters. I like that term. And there's just it's been great. And people, when I took a poll, do you want one school of thought or do you want diversity of thought, multiple people? And over 80% said we want multiple perspectives. We want to learn from multiple people. So that was a great sign. But that's just a little bit of the summit, and I can already see people benefiting from it as they were having conversations behind the scenes. So yeah.
That's an interesting thing. 80%. You might have expected the opposite. Like, people would want the answer, the single perspective, the conclusion. But in a world of uncertainty, don't you? I mean, that would be my sense of it. Would be people would probably want maybe an argument or debate, because those are popular, right? Let's set up a debate between thought A and thought B, and then let's go at that, and then vote on which one you think is the best. But your approach is a bit different. It's not about that. It's about, let's hear from the different voices here.
Then we could come away with the canon that we all agree on.
Yeah, you could be emperor.
Well, yeah, you guys are hitting the nail on the head. People are ready for more perspectives. They're starting to see kind of some of the limitations and maybe their own Enneagram schools that they were brought up in, their own certifications. And yeah, they can see the limitations by those. And so they're hungry for more knowledge. And I think that makes people wiser. Or like you said, it makes wisdom more available. So having sort of humility to say, I could be wrong, or maybe my school doesn't have it all right. I want to be more curious and listen more. Like that takes humility. That's really, really hard to get to that place. And so I find it funny that you're inviting me on to talk about wisdom, because I never feel like the smartest person in the room. I don't feel very wise. I feel ignorant a lot of times. I have the imposter syndrome where I just feel like I'm faking everybody out. So why in the world would you invite me on to talk about wisdom? But there's certain things in my stories that have helped me to become more wise. You know, we're just living in a world right now there's a lot of tribalism, there's hyper polarization in politics, religion, race. There's just so much polarization, and I think it's just keeping people in these bubbles. And there's all these obstacles to gaining wisdom because of the polarization going on. If people can be more curious, it can really push against the tide in a very, very hopeful way. So I grew up in a narrow religious environment in my 20s where we were right and everybody else was wrong. And what made it more complicated is that we talked about things like epistemology. And because we were in such an intellectual culture, I wanted to believe in everything that the pastor said. It's like, okay, yeah, because we go back to the sacred text, the sacred source of wisdom, the Bible, and we look at the Bible more than every other church, then yeah, we must be right because we're Bible people and other people aren't. And then you get into this group and there's this pressure not to read other authors, go to other leaders, and sort of I think the drive is to keep wisdom in. Like if you just stay within these boundaries, then you will. But what I didn't realize what was happening was that it was, keeping wisdom out. And that's really, I think, a lesson to be learned is, sometimes when you're trying to stay within your boundaries, you think that you're protecting yourself when really you're making yourself more vulnerable to confirmation bias and these things. You're remaining weaker, not stronger. And so I was in this religious circle and I had certain views on women. I had certain views on politics. I'd always voted the same way when it came to politics in the elections. And it wasn't until like 2019 that something very, very significant happened to me. And we merged our church with a multi-ethnic church. So I'm a type 3. I was leading a primarily white church. There was a new multi-ethnic church that had just started, led by an African-American type 8 pastor. And we decided to merge our churches together. Have you ever seen any church mergers go well, you guys?
Never.
And the reason why they don't go well is because they're acquisitions. And this is true
Yeah.
of the business world. So for those
Yeah,
business
that's
people
true.
watching, whenever there's a business merger, it's usually not a merger.
Mhm.
It's an acquisition. It's a takeover. It's like, we're going to swallow up your culture, swallow up your preferences, and you are going to conform to us. Whereas a real merger, a business merger, a real church merger is like a marriage. It's just two entities coming together to say, you know what, we're going to rearrange the furniture in the house together. I'm going to learn from you. You're going to learn from me. We're going to learn from. There's a sense of humility there, right? Of your preferences actually might be better for me. And that takes a lot of humility. It took a
Mhm.
lot of humility from our church to be like, you know what, we're going to give up our preferences when it came to worship style. You are way more charismatic than us, and that makes us really uncomfortable. But hey, we're going to do this thing together. And so we end up merging and trying to make it as much of a marriage as possible, trying to have humility. And we said, hey, we're going to try to outdo one another in showing honor to each other. That was like the main principle. The guiding principle is
Mm.
we're going to keep trying to outdo one another in showing honor. And then it got really uncomfortable because I would be sitting next to a Latina friend of mine, and she had different political views. And now you're sort of, when you're in these relationships with people that think differently than you or have different experiences, it forces you to look for new evidence, to rethink your positions. So the relationships are really driving me to maybe overcome some of that confirmation bias or some of those obstacles that were in place. And through that process, I ended up voting for a candidate from a different political party than I'd ever voted for, and that was crazy to me. A few years prior to that, I'd wrote a position paper that was like 30 pages long on why women shouldn't lead at the highest level in the church or why women shouldn't preach. And now I disagree with all of it. Disagree with all of it. It's because of those relationships caused me to start doubting the things that I was so
Mhm.
certain in, and making me more curious about why they believed what they believed. And it sent me on a search for wisdom, basically to doubt some of my the things that I had been so certain of. I'll
Mm.
stop there.
Well, immediately what you're saying reminds me of the conversation from the podcast we just had last week about the wisdom of the three centers. And I think in the Western, I can't speak for every spiritual tradition, but the ones that I came from, there was this very much this emphasis on head. And it was like making arguments and like thinking that you could make the most concise arguments. And it was so head centric that it missed a lot of the practicality of the body center and the relational integration of the heart center. And so, what I hear in your story is it's not that we always put ourselves in these positions, but you were placed into a context which required more integration because you're relationally connecting, but those relational connections create these practical outcomes that you have to deal with in the body space. And so that integration, it made you shift and you couldn't stay in that particular world because something was being pulled out of you. Does that?
Yeah. So my parents watch a lot of media, news stations, and that's a whole nother topic for wisdom. Where are you getting wisdom? Are you getting it
Right.
from the news or from relationships? And that
Yeah.
drives me crazy now because my parents, you can make really rational arguments that sound very wise, and you can unpack those things on the media, and then you can come to certain convictions about political convictions and things like that. But I'm like, mom and dad, I'm sitting next to these people, and these are real relationships. And so maybe that's moving from head to heart, or the more experiential aspect of when you get down with people, and have that connection and that chemistry. It causes you to rethink what your head is telling you is true. But yeah, the relationships can help counter some of the lies or the things that seem so rational when we hear them from our own camp. Does that make sense, Jim?
Yeah, I think you're nailing it because that's the certainty bias. It makes sense as long as you don't hear any other perspectives. It's like I think there's even something in Proverbs about that an argument seems right until the counter steps up. But if you never have a context where there is a counter argument, and this is something that is very steeped into the Jewish text, is they believe that a culture was a group of people who argued about the same things. So it wasn't about having this concise linear, everything decided way of seeing the world. So much of it was about preserving key arguments. That's so much of what like Talmud and Torah scholars, I think there's even a quote that says that the rivalry of scholars advances knowledge. So there's very much this, you were putting into a context all of a sudden where it isn't very wise to be isolated and to have one narrative that's always being thrown at you, because it's very easy to brainwash yourself. And then, but when you're put into a context where you're hearing alternate narratives, something else was being drawn out of you. But how did you experience that when you were first hearing it? Did you first hear it and feel like uncomfortable, but also I care about this person? Like, I think changing one's perspective and the story they've always told themselves is really hard to do for any of us. What was it like for you to start being in a situation where the narrative you'd always been given, the story that you had believed, started to shift under your feet?
Yeah, this might be true of a lot of people who are listening, but they might be in a certain group or certain camp or school, whatever it is. And your gut or your heart might be telling you, I don't know that this is true, but I don't know any other, I don't know where to go. And I feel unfaithful or I feel disloyal if I start thinking other things or listening to other people. That's a real thing of being scared, because there's like this group think and everyone's on the same page. And if you deviate from our beliefs, from our convictions, from our opinions, then you might be cast out. You might, be thrown out of the camp. And so there's this underlying fear that we might not be conscious of, that's sort of driving us to stay in line. And I had always really I wanted women to preach. I felt like that was a natural thing to do. But my camp was saying, well, because Paul said this in this particular letter, that women should not teach or have authority over men, then I'm going to be disloyal to God. I'm going to be unfaithful to God. And then I'm going to be on the slippery slope to hell. That was the weird thoughts that I was having. And that was so fear-based. Right. But then I would sit next to these women of color friends that I've gotten, and they came from churches where women were preaching and leading. And so I was like, oh, that's interesting. They seem like they're in a pretty secure spot in their faith, and let me learn from them. And so they gave me permission and freedom to explore things that I used to be fearful of exploring, too afraid of exploring. And I then took steps towards. And the Enneagram, by the way, was another huge aspect of freeing me from, when you get around female eights and you're like they're wired to bring it. They're wired to challenge. That's a divine design. That's not them being rebellious. And so that Enneagram was a huge piece in this as well. But yeah, getting in close to those relationships and then learning what they're learning and reading the books that they're reading, it just brought a lot of freedom to me. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's interesting because some retreat in those contexts. They retreat back into the familiar. Why do you think you didn't?
It's a good question. I think maybe the more you live, this comes with experience and age. Life just punches you in the face enough times the more you live, and you start to get these scars of, I thought I was right, and then I got pounded by life. And so it starts to humble you. It starts to refine you as you get older. And so there's just enough times where I realized I've been wrong. I've been wrong a lot. And that's what's been like being an Enneagram 3 married to an Enneagram 6, where I always told my wife everything's going to go right. And then when I didn't change the oil in her car because I thought, nothing bad's going to happen. And then I was broke down on the side of the road. Then I'm like, okay, maybe my wife has more wisdom than I do. So enough of those situations happen that sort of break you down to realize, no, you do not know what you're talking about. You have enough of those examples where you start to be like, okay, I should listen to other people now.
Mm-hmm.
I might be wrong. I could be wrong. And that gets me into the space of saying, wisdom isn't certainty, wisdom is discernment, and wisdom is having levels of certainty. And one of these theologians I listened to talked about how there's blood issues, ink issues, and pencil issues. So blood, ink, and pencil issues. And too many, like religious people in particular, but this could be in politics and everything, is saying everything's a blood issue. Like we need to die for all of these issues. And then there's ink issues of like things that you are persuaded of that you think are pretty true, and you're writing in them in ink. But then there's also pencil issues that are things that you say and believe that you're like, maybe I'll erase those and have different opinions tomorrow. And where people get unhealthy is when they treat everything as a blood issue, or most things as an ink issue, and they don't realize that no, we can't be certain of a lot of things. And so I need to have a higher level of receptivity and listening to people that disagree with me. And so I even remember saying to somebody in our church, when I was writing this 30-page position paper, I said, well, I could be wrong, and I'm open to changing my views someday. Well, 5 years later, it did happen. I did change my views, but it's really, really hard to say that I could be wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, there's an important analogy here. I love the blood, ink, and pencil kind of framework, because I think there's some never get to the blood either. Some stay in the pencil, and I think
that's good.
I think that wisdom has the ability to, as you said, discern between which one it is, and to have all three really operating inside you.
And the people that are all about everything's a blood issue are like people with having too close fists.
Yeah.
They're like holding on to their beliefs, convictions, and they have two fists and they're always willing to fight. Whereas if you're more open-minded, you have two open hands. So you're more receptive, or you're more able to receive. And those are two different kinds of people.
Very much so. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the uncertainty you're talking about to me is a sign, maybe even the sign of wisdom, because you said at the beginning, like, we're talking about wisdom and I don't feel very wise and I feel this imposter syndrome and I have this. And I was like in this situation and I started like asking questions and having doubts, and I could be wrong. I could be wrong is one of the wisest statements in human history because it's not like I don't have a position, right? So there are those, like the everything is pencil, like Joel's talking about. I don't even have perspective. Everything is equal. Everything matters. Like that was the postmodern kind of perspective. Or it does seem right now, the era that we're in right now, it's like it's at the other extreme. Everything is blood. I have to be right. I can't ever be wrong. I can't ever disagree. And I can't disagree with my camp. And even if I do, there's this like very locked in, it's a very trapped way that I think is especially politically is very much across the board right now. And it's hard to see that. It's hard to experience that when you're someone who has been through what all of us have been through, which is we are absolutely certain that we were wrong about things that we were absolutely certain about before.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't want to go down the path of saying, okay, now we're so open-minded, right, that there's nothing that we close on. Because I think there should be places where we say this is blood, and places where we say this is ink, and places where we say this is pencil. And I think the lack of discernment around that is important. And I think it has to do with the awareness of, and I'll use the broken clock analogy, is that a broken clock may be right twice a day. It has its place. It doesn't have its place, but it has its opinion about things. Like, let's push the metaphor a little further and say, like, it has its opinion. It's right. Look, I was right. It's 3:00 again. So I was right. But being right about your conclusions, but unaware about the process of how you got to your conclusion, that's the problem I think we're running into. And having bias is not a problem. People think you're supposed to be unbiased. There's no such thing. There's no human brain without bias. It's an impossibility. You would implode. You would make no decisions ever in life. It's called a paradigm. It's the same thing as a relevance realization, the ability to foreground things, to background other things. You walk into a room with a self-pres person versus a person that has almost no self-pres and they're primarily social. You will have completely two views of the room. The things that they're coming up with are going to be very different. This is why people who are in close relationships, married, friends, whatever, they are so always surprised by what the other person sees and what they foreground, what seems to stand out. Did you notice this? No, I didn't even see that. And that has to do with bias. There's nothing wrong with bias. But are you aware of your bias? And I think that that's the terrifying thing, because it works against your need for security and certainty, and your need to feel like you belong to something, and you're part of something, and or on the other extreme of like no certainty and no belief in anything because I've been let down so many times, that then you're avoiding all of it. But I think that's an important thing to point out, is that it sounds to me like, at least where you are and where we're trying to go, is more towards what is informing me. Like, what is the underneath thing? And the Enneagram has been, like you mentioned, it's been such a powerful tool for me to recognize the world doesn't see everything through the 7 lens. I stole this from someone else who said, it's like every type thinks that every other type is a bad version of themselves. It's like you're not quite where you should be. And to actually recognize there's 9 different views on the world, at least. It's like that should be a significant moment of, then who's right? Right? And then and that's what, I guess it's a matter of perspective. It's a matter of how you got to your beliefs and your views. But it takes a ton of humility, as you mentioned earlier. I think that is the thing that's terrifying, is humility, to like, I could be wrong, and can I fall into, because I could feel it viscerally. The humility affects me right in my gut. It's like to let go of certainty, to let go of things that I hold on to, and to drop into the entropy or the complexity of the unknown, the diversity of thought, the diversity of opinion on things. It's a scary place to be.
Yeah, I think what Joel's saying is really helpful, because you can't go through life open-minded, meaning, like, to use an open mouth, for example, if you just keep your mouth open, you'll never be able to like digest food and grow.
That's a Chesterton quote. Chesterton said the purpose of an open mind is the same as an open mouth, to close on something solid.
There we go.
Yeah, I love it.
That's great. I heard so I think of like a 1 and 9, a type 1 and type 9 in partnership with each other. Like somebody who's very like, this is right, this is wrong, and then someone who's a 9 who's very open-minded. Like, you need both, because there's some situations where you need to think outside the box and need to be more grayscale, and then there's other situations, like justice situations, that need to be more black and white. Like, this is wrong. You can't just go through life like, oh, maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, who knows. Like, let's just stay open-minded about everything. No, there's certain things that are healthy, certain things that are unhealthy. So I like what you're getting at, Joel. You're kind of, it's a counterbalance to what we're talking about here, which is really important. Where I'm coming from is, yeah, my experience has been like, I needed to get outside of my own group to actually find wisdom. And, I think that people of color have a really, we need to learn from them, because my friends of color have had to be in situations their whole life that caused to stretch them. But I still remember, like, there's a person of color that came into our church before we had merged as a multi-ethnic church. And I just thought, they like being here. Like, they like the culture. They must just love us. And then it wasn't until after we merged the multi-ethnic church and started having these conversations of like, no, they felt tension every single week. Of no one was listening to their preferences. They weren't coming to and having their preferences met, and they were having to be stretched by listening to things from a different culture, so to speak. And that's really, really challenging. And so a lot of people of color have to be in environments where they have had to learn things that were different from them. And so they just are in a really unique position to teach us on what it looks like to be stretched and to grow, because a lot of us just keep ourselves in very comfortable environments. I think about, you guys have probably run into people who have, homeschooled their kids, didn't want them to go to college, you want to keep them safe in their bubble, and not let them go to the secular university and put everything on the line. But, I always tell people, it's like, do you want to remain weak, or do you want to get stronger? Because when you go to get your flu shot, they literally inject you with the flu, with the virus.
Yeah.
And then it makes your whole body stronger. So listening to other perspectives can actually be like getting the flu shot. It can actually make you stronger, not weaker. Does that make sense?
It makes sense even through biodiversity. Like the very fact that we have been able to fight off so many diseases has come from the biodiversity. In places where there is none, or has in the history there hasn't been much of it, when other invaders came in, they died mostly from diseases. And I think that there's wisdom to that from a biological standpoint, but also from a psychological standpoint, right? So because everything mirrors each other, everything is connected, and so the very fact that we're stretched by being with people of color, we're stretched by being people of a different political persuasion, we're stretched by being around different people of different instinctual stackings or different different types. I hear from people all the time saying like, this particular type always triggers me. It's like, good. That's a good thing, right? It's like, well, but that's a trigger, and so I should protect myself from it. Well, that's our impulse, right? That's the protective brain. But the thriving brain says, no, this is an opportunity for growth. This is an opportunity for you to discover what's going on inside you that's having this reaction, and in what way could you grow from that and actually begin to really love that other person. Great book on really touches on a lot of that is from Miroslav Volf, a Yale professor, Exclusion and Embrace. Phenomenal book about that. But it's that coming together in the embrace where you still have your identities, but you are now close. And that's a difficult kind of community to establish. It is challenging. I mean, your merger, I'm sure, was not an easy thing to have this coming together of very diverse viewpoints and culture, experience, and all of those things.
Yeah. I think one of the applications is, okay, to have a sense of humility and curiosity of thinking I could be wrong, but it's also to see how you might be complicit in keeping other perspectives out or other views out unintentionally. So because most places are very polarized still. Maybe I shouldn't say most, but a lot. Like I even think of the church, and the church is still one of the most segregated places in the country on Sunday mornings. There's still so much like segregation of there's not diversity. There's you go to a white church, you go to a black church, you go to a Latino church, like there's still that. And then that's true of politics as well. If you want to be Republican, you got to be like really Republican in order to get like praised or advance, or you have to be really Democrat. So you have to kind of like move towards polarization. And then when we're in our circles, we don't realize how much pressure we're exerting on what we perceive to be like foreign or dangerous ideas. It's like where the immune system, when it detects a foreign body, it's like, alert, 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 danger, like let's kick that thing out. And so you might have a church that's primarily filled with Republicans, just to use an example. And so you have these small groups in your church, your Republican church, and you have 9 Republicans in the living room in the small group, and then you have 1 Democrat that comes in, and you start talking about immigration or whatever topic you're going to be talking about. You don't realize how much pressure you're exerting on that one Democrat to not say anything. And if they say even one thing that sounds suspicious, like that thing is going to get shot down quickly. And so, but it might be, vice versa. It might be 9, Democrats and 1 Republican. We might be unintentionally pushing wisdom out, but by groupthink and group pressure. Does that make sense?
And it happens in corporate. We have teams that are predominantly, let's say, body center 8, 9s, and 1s, and then you'll have, a couple of head types, and there's 1 heart type. Every single time, all we have to say to the heart type is, I bet you feel somewhat excluded. I just did this for a family system, actually, where in a family of 5, there's only 1 heart type. And I asked him, I said, how does it feel? Do you feel like you're on way on the outside? I mean, everybody feels like they're somewhat on the outside, but I mean, do you really see that? It's like, 100%. It's so different. In my experience is that I don't feel like I'm, and he didn't have the language for it, but it's like this feeling of, I don't feel like I'm represented. I don't feel like I'm allowed to really be fully myself in the space. And like you're saying, it's not like there's intentionality of repressing that individual. as you illustrate with Republicans or people of color. It's like, it's not that there's an active intentionality behind that. Some there are, for sure. There are systems of injustice that choose to remain that way deliberately. Let's just put that and put a big period next to that. That's true. However, for most of us who are not in control of those systems or participating in them, we do so without awareness many times. It does not make us less responsible. It just means that we're not aware. And I think those voices to deliberately, and this is even stuff we do in the trainings, we'll say, look, you've got one heart type, you're going to have to actually lean towards that heart and actually invite them in. Or we do this with the instincts. Listen, you're an organization with low self-preservation instinct in there. You're actually going to deliberately have to ask and use the language of the self-preservation instinct. Hey, what we want to institute this change, but what disruption is this going to cause? Right? So it's things like that I think we have to become better at in order to be people of wisdom. What do you think about what comes up for you as I say that?
Wow. Now you're getting into issues of power. Like this is a huge deal. It makes sense. A lot of times we're in positions of power, we have privilege, and we don't realize it. So we're just making decisions, and and we don't realize that, as as a type 8 Jim, your job is to distribute power, to empower other people, to raise people up. So if you have any sort of power, privilege, it's to sort of empower other people. And so a humble leader will say, I could be wrong, so I am going to get people in the boardroom. I'm going to get voices around me that think differently than me. And they might not be right, but wisdom is listening to all the sides, thinking I could be wrong, and then making the wise decision to move forward. I love how this is true in the church. It's also true in the boardroom, that we can get unbalanced. And I've seen too in companies where half the team, when they take the Enneagram test, they test the same type as their boss.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because there's this culture that they have set and shaped. And the same thing is true in the church as well, as leaders shape the culture. And they say, well, preaching is worship is this, and they kind of set those things as like normative, and they don't want to learn from preferences from anybody else. And so one of the things that we've talked about in a multi-ethnic church that applies everywhere is that diversity starts at my dinner table.
Like beautiful.
Diversity starts at our dinner table. We have to get people at our dinner table, people that disagree with us, that don't have the same perspective as us, who have a different color than us, come from a different country. Like we need diversity at our dinner table. And that could be true of the boardroom as well. We need diversity around the boardroom table. And that takes a lot of humility, but a wise person will see the need for that.
Yeah.
And use their power to facilitate that.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting for me because I grew up when I was very young in a church that was predominantly Korean. And then when I was in high school, I went to a high school that was predominantly black. And so I've never really, except for like a couple churches I was a part of for a while, I was never in a predominantly white space. So there was always kind of that diversity. And I thought, one, makes the food way better. So that was one of the highlights of those experiences. And I love that. But the perspective differences were always there too. But one of the things I didn't realize until I was much older was that I still had like this assumptive worldview that the multicultural experiences was people's norms. And then when you go into some of these places where it's not, like then you get pushed up against. So it's almost like no matter what kind of experience you have, it's going to get tested when you go into these different arenas. And the assumptive aspects of it can be. And I'll tell you where one of these areas where this brings up some stress for me, and I'd love to hear both of your thoughts on this, is if I can go around for a second. So it's in parenting. And I was raised with a very set, like, this is the way things are. And then as I grew and I had more experiences, that didn't quite work. It's a lot broader than that. And that creates the stress, but it also creates wisdom. It's awesome. But then I've also seen kids who are raised with like none of that structure, where it's like anything, it's very much like open. Every perspective is equal and matters. And seeing the stats on these over time, that almost like if you're too much of a bubble, it's very stressful in the system to break out of it, even though good things can come from that. But if there's no structure and there is no blood or ink in the world as pencil, those kids actually are the most susceptible to becoming radicalized, becoming a fanatic. They're more susceptible to cults as they get older because the world didn't have answers. And now someone comes along and says, we have all the answers. And so and somewhere in there is conversations that my wife and I have had about parenting. We're like, we want to give her some structure and say that the world works a certain way. But then sometimes I'll be like, well, it doesn't always work this way. And then I'm like, okay, she doesn't need all of that nuance right now. But this is the struggle, I think, in that when it comes to wisdom and parenting and everything we've been talking about, that this is a hard road to walk. And I think for a lot of us who grew up in a system where there was a lot of dogmatism, certainty, and then we lost some of that, I've noticed that having a creating struggle in some of the parenting that I'm doing. And so I'd love kind of both of your thoughts on that piece.
Joel, you want to go first?
I was hoping you would.
Well, I'll just say there's a temptation to like, I really want to answer Jim's question and like give him a solid answer. But the only answer I have is when I was going through an ethics class, we talked a lot about virtue and becoming a virtuous person. And, when you take care of the lawn, you can keep pulling weeds, or you can do the preventative care and the proactive care of watering, fertilizing, doing these things that like take care of a healthy lawn. And then over time, your weeds will just disappear. And I think that the same thing is true with wisdom is if you practice the principles of wisdom and are healthy and then get around other wise people and are in community with those people, then you can start getting answers to those really, really hard questions, because a lot of them are very circumstantial. Like if you gave a really specific circumstance, we might be able to give a helpful answer, but it kind of depends on your situation, your circumstance. And wisdom is helpful because it gives you answers where knowledge doesn't apply, where Wikipedia or a Google search, it won't help you because it's just giving you knowledge. It's not understanding your context and that sort of thing. So all of the things that happened before this conversation can help you to make wise decisions. Does that make sense?
Can you talk a little bit more about the virtue piece?
Yeah, we talked about in ethics, like my son he was still growing, he wasn't a fully formed adult yet. He's, just entering high school. My counterphobic sixth son, he comes up with really rational opinions on things, but he doesn't have context yet. He doesn't have life experience yet. He doesn't have all these things yet. And what I'm saying is, if we practice virtue over time and try to cultivate virtue, then it will lead to more wisdom, or at least it should. And part of one principle of becoming wise is being around other people that aren't like you, to overcome your biases. But like doing lots of reading, being a reader, being a learner, and then the centers of intelligence, the things that you were just talking about before, of being more integrated as a person, pursuing holistic things, like all those can help you to become more wise.
I think that's really good that you mentioned virtue, because it is something that I think every good ancient philosopher would have been very happy that you said that. Virtue is so critically important. And I believe that that's actually perhaps so here we go. Biblical background, church background. The Apostle Paul in Galatians 5, when he speaks about the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, they're virtues. Those, love is a virtue. And there are values that help us to achieve and get to those virtues. But virtues really are the most important to my mind. And when we look at those, we ask ourselves, and we can ask ourselves, is what I'm doing getting me there? Is it in line with that virtue? Both in the sense that I'm acting in a virtuous way, but I'm also hoping that what I'm doing produces more of that in my life. And I think when we think about that with our children, that's applicable too. It's like, are we aiming in that direction?
Yeah, if you have a good root, then you'll have good fruit.
Ooh.
So we'll start preaching, Joel.
Start preaching. Yeah, this is church now.
Because it rhymes now.
That's the best kind of wisdom.
That's the best kind of
that's
wisdom. It's the kind that rhymes.
That's really good. We used to use this illustration of, you could put like fake apples, a fake
Yeah.
on a tree, but it's not the same thing as like creating a healthy tree that grows its own
Yeah.
healthy fruit. And so what you're getting at is there's these healthy practices that we can do. We can lay down our roots, and then the good fruit will come.
Yes.
And that takes time. It takes a lot of
Yes.
time.
Yes.
It takes
Yes.
time, but it also takes the right question. That's why I feel like so much at the heart of wisdom traditions is the idea of a great question. Where, I was told growing up, love your neighbor as yourself, and, be loving. But then what that meant changed a lot from place to place. But a wisdom question is, what does love look like in this situation, in this context? That's a much harder thing to answer. It takes the development of virtue to know. Because I love, Joel just said that love is a virtue. And so much in our culture, love is this feeling, it's in these stories, but when it goes from the experience to the virtue, that's the journey that most people who have a long-term healthy relationship are going to refer to it as. They're going to talk about it in a way that reflects that value system. And so I love that we're talking about the value of a virtue, because there's the virtue and then the questions around the virtue of how to live it out. And this is the process of and development of wisdom. Yeah.
And I love how this goes right in with the instincts that we've been talking about. If you're a self-preservation dominant person, there's wisdom in being around social dominant people and having a community of people that are different, that can help you to answer hard questions.
I love that. Tyler, tell people more about your work, what you're doing right now, what you're working on, where they can find more about what you're doing and where you're headed.
Yeah. So I spent 5 years writing a 40-day devotional for every Enneagram type. So 180-page book for every type. It's a big 5-year project. So for those listening from like a faith-based tradition, if you're a faith-based practitioner, that will be really helpful to know that those books are on Amazon. Those are labors of love. But I enjoy working with the wider Enneagram community as well, and that's why the Enne Summit coming up is. And I do 3 Enne Summits per year, so I do a mental health summit with panels, and so I probably do a summit on the second half of life, like navigating midlife to end of life, and Enneagram types and all that goodness stuff. So I have more like great topics coming.
Wonderful.
And so you can, jump on my email list and get notifications to join those summits for free and learn from amazing people. But yeah, and just I'm enjoying doing that, and also like homeschooling my kid at home and partnering with my wife in this season of life. And I'm just love being able to do Enneagram work and be more available at home. And it's just been a great season. And I appreciate you guys having me on. And I just love, I'm standing on your shoulders of all the subtype works that you've done, the Enneagram work you've done. So I just so appreciate you guys. And it's a real honor to be invited to come on with you guys. So just appreciate you guys.
Thank you. I think what you're doing is so important for continued wisdom. And we've said before, even we think the Enneagram is a wisdom tradition. It's a tradition that we're trying to increase in wisdom and grow over time in how we relate to each other, how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to the outside world. And I think you're a really important voice right now in what you developing what you want to say, but also in bringing voices together and then helping sift through this experience as a community. And so I'm really excited and grateful for your work and what you're doing in the space and for sharing time with us today and letting us hear a bit more of your heart and your journey, because that's what, I think one of the truest things that any artist said is that the most universal thing is the most individual. So when we share our individual stories, it's because we can connect to a larger universal truth. And I'm very grateful for what you've shared here today. So thanks.
Thanks, guys. Well, there's so many more conversations to be had.
We will. We're going to have more with you.
I think we will.
But we created some good space for this today. And so I'm really, really happy to have the conversation.
Thank you.